Ellen Carter stood motionless among the sympathy cards and half-eaten casseroles at George's funeral reception, her 66 years suddenly a crushing weight. The mahogany casket had been lowered just hours ago, her husband of 43 years now beneath the earth. Her phone vibrated in her pocket, probably another condolence message. The text appeared from an unknown number. "I am still alive. Trust no one." Ellen's knees weakened. George's voice echoed in those words. His paranoia about their son's recent financial troubles. His suspicion when his coffee tasted bitter. She glanced across the room where William and Daniel stood, accepting condolences, their expressions appropriately solemn, her own flesh and blood, the only family she had left. Her finger hovered over the delete button, then stopped. What if it wasn't a cruel prank? What if George was trying to warn her? The organist's final notes hung in the air of St. Mark's Episcopal Church as Ellen Carter sat motionless in the front pew. Her hands, weathered by 66 years of living, clutched a handkerchief embroidered with her husband's initials. George's casket, polished mahogany with brass fixtures, dominated the altar area, surrounded by arrangements of lilies and chrysanthemums that failed to mask the scent of grief. William, her eldest, leaned closer. "Mother, it's time." His voice carried the practiced tone of an attorney accustomed to guiding clients through difficult moments. At 43, he was the spitting image of his father, the same broad shoulders, the same precise way of speaking. Ellen nodded, rising as the funeral director approached with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. Professional compassion, she thought, wondering how many widows he'd shepherded through this ritual. "The service was beautiful," Daniel whispered from her other side. At 39, her younger son had always been the more emotional one, though today his reddened eyes seemed oddly dry. Dad would have approved. Would he? Ellen wasn't certain. George had been specific about wanting cremation, yet somehow William had convinced her that family tradition demanded a traditional burial. Another compromise in their 43-year marriage. As they processed down the aisle, Ellen felt the weight of eyes upon her. George's colleagues, neighbors, distant relatives. Their murmurs blended into a symphony of platitudes. "He's at peace now," and "call if you need anything," and such a shock, so unexpected. The unexpected part was true, at least. 3 weeks ago, George had been fine, complaining about his coffee tasting bitter, yes, but otherwise healthy for a man of 70. Then came the sudden illness, the rushed hospital visit, the bewildering diagnosis of organ failure. Outside, sunlight assaulted her eyes. William's hand steadied her elbow as they moved toward the waiting cars. "We've arranged a small reception at your house," he informed her. "Daniel has handled the catering." Ellen nodded again, the proper widow performing her role in this elaborate social theater, while inside, a voice whispered that something about George's death didn't make sense. The reception filled Ellen's living room with hushed conversations and the clinking of coffee cups against saucers. She moved mechanically between clusters of guests, accepting condolences with appropriate nods, and murmured thanks. The grandfather clock in the hallway, George's pride and joy, ticked relentlessly onward. Her phone vibrated in the pocket of her black dress. Probably another condolence text. Ellen had received dozens already, former students from her teaching days, church members, distant relatives. She retreated to the window alcove, seeking a moment's respite from the performance of grief. The message appeared from an unknown number. "I am still alive. Trust no one." Ellen's breath caught. The room tilted slightly. She gripped the windowsill, steadying herself. The text glowed accusingly on the screen. Was this someone's idea of a cruel joke? A scam targeting a vulnerable widow? Yet something in the phrasing, the exclamation point, the urgent warning, echoed George's voice. His paranoia these past months, his insistence that someone had been tampering with his medications. She glanced across the room where William stood with the pastor, nodding solemnly. Daniel circulated with a tray of finger sandwiches, the perfect host, her sons, her only family now. The message continued to burn on her screen. Ellen's thumb hovered over the delete button, then paused. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her heart hammering against her ribs. Impossible. George was gone. She'd identified his body at the hospital, watched them close the casket this morning. Yet the seed of doubt had been planted, taking root in soil already disturbed by George's unexpected decline. Ellen excused herself with a whispered word about needing a moment alone. Her legs carried her toward the bathroom, away from sympathetic eyes and empty comforts. In the privacy of the hallway, she reread the message. 7 words that threatened to unravel everything she thought she knew. Ellen splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back seemed a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, lost. She took 3 deep breaths, steadying herself before returning to the reception. The guests had thinned considerably. A few neighbors lingered in the dining room, while Ellen's sister-in-law, Martha, gathered leftover food in the kitchen. Funeral programs lay abandoned on side tables, plates with half-eaten sandwiches left on windowsills. In the study, she found William and Daniel speaking in low voices. They fell silent at her entrance, their posture shifting subtly. "Mom," Daniel said, his voice overly bright, "Martha's boxing up food for your freezer. You won't need to cook for weeks." Ellen nodded, watching them with new awareness. Had Daniel always had that nervous habit of adjusting his cufflinks? Had William's smile always seemed so calculated? "We were just discussing practical matters," William said, straightening a stack of papers on George's desk. "The insurance company requires certain documentation. Nothing for you to worry about today." "What kind of documentation?" Ellen asked, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. The brothers exchanged a glance. "Death certificate, primarily," William answered smoothly. "There's also the matter of Dad's investments. We'll need to transfer those to your accounts." "I wasn't aware George had separate investments," Ellen said. Daniel laughed too quickly. "Dad always liked to handle the finances. You know how he was, keeping everything organized in his own system." "Yes," Ellen said, moving toward the desk. "He was very organized." William shifted slightly, blocking her path. "We should discuss all this tomorrow. You need rest, Mom." "Actually, I'd like to see what you're looking at," Ellen insisted, stepping around him. Reluctantly, William moved aside. On the desk lay a document Ellen had never seen before, an insurance policy with a substantial death benefit, much larger than she'd realized. The beneficiary line caught her eye: William Carter and Daniel Carter, to be divided equally. "I don't understand," Ellen said. "When did George take out this policy?" "About 6 months ago," Daniel said. "Estate planning. He wanted to make sure we were all taken care of." Ellen's fingers traced the paper. "Why aren't I listed as the beneficiary?" Another silent exchange between her sons. "Tax purposes," William said firmly. "Dad wanted to avoid estate complications." "Don't worry, Mom. We'll make sure you're provided for." As they spoke, Ellen noticed a small notation in George's handwriting on the policy's corner, a question mark and the letters MS, followed by a phone number she didn't recognize. "Of course," she said, her mind racing. "I'm sure you'll both do what's right." She slipped the policy into the desk drawer, noting how Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly at the gesture. The mysterious text message suddenly felt less like a cruel joke and more like a warning bell. Riverside Community Hospital's records department smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. Ellen sat stiffly in a molded plastic chair, her purse clutched in her lap. The institutional fluorescent lighting cast everyone in an unflattering pallor, making the young clerk behind the counter look nearly as exhausted as Ellen felt. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter," the clerk said, not meeting Ellen's eyes. "Medical records can only be released to the patient or with proper authorization." "My husband is deceased," Ellen replied, her voice steadier than she expected. "I'm his widow and next of kin." "You'll need to complete these forms." The clerk slid a clipboard across the counter. "And provide a death certificate. There's a processing period of 5 to 7 business days." Ellen's fingers tightened around her purse. "I don't have 5 days. I need to understand what happened to my husband." The clerk's expression softened slightly. "The attending physician should have explained." "Dr. Winters said it was multiple organ failure," Ellen interrupted. "But George was healthy just weeks before. I need to see the detailed lab work." Minutes stretched into an hour as Ellen navigated bureaucratic barriers, filling out forms with trembling hands while maintaining a veneer of composure. Finally, a supervisor relented, disappearing into a back room and returning with a thin folder. "You can review these here," she said. "They can't leave the department." Ellen opened the file with careful fingers. Pages of medical jargon swam before her eyes, but certain phrases leaped out. Unexplained metabolic acidosis. Visual disturbance reported prior to admission. Elevated anion gap. Formic acid detected. Her librarian's instinct for research kicked in, focusing her attention on the unfamiliar term formic acid. She remembered George complaining about blurry vision the week before his hospitalization, about his coffee tasting strange. "Was there a toxicology report?" she asked. The supervisor hesitated. "It should be included." Ellen found it at the back of the file. Preliminary findings noted the presence of methanol metabolites. Not conclusive, but suspicious. Her mind flashed to a news article she'd read years ago about methanol poisoning. It caused blindness, then organ failure if untreated. Poisoning. The word hung in her mind, terrible and unavoidable. The text message suddenly made horrifying sense, as did her son's interest in the insurance policy. Ellen closed the file, her hands now perfectly steady. "Thank you for your help," she said to the supervisor, rising to leave with new knowledge weighing heavily in her heart. The dining room table gleamed under candlelight, set with Ellen's good china, George's favorite pattern with the blue forget-me-nots. The empty chair at the head of the table loomed like an accusation. William had suggested they gather for dinner to check on her, a gesture that once would have seemed thoughtful. Now Ellen wondered if they were monitoring her. "The casserole is delicious, Mom," Daniel said, reaching for seconds. "You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble." "Cooking helps me think," Ellen replied, studying her younger son. Had that flicker of calculation always been present in his eyes? She waited until they'd finished the main course before venturing, "I was looking through some of George's things today, found his journal from these last few months." The brothers exchanged a quick glance. "Dad kept a journal?" William's tone was carefully neutral. "I didn't know that." "He mentioned not feeling well before his final illness," Ellen continued. "Said his coffee tasted bitter, that his vision was blurry." Daniel set down his fork. "The doctors explained this, Mom. Organ failure affects perception." "But these symptoms came before he was hospitalized," Ellen pressed. "He wrote that he suspected someone might have been tampering with his medication. William's laugh sounded forced. Dad was always a worrier. Remember how he insisted someone was stealing his tools when he just misplaced them in the garage? He wasn't confused, Ellen said quietly. He was very specific about the symptoms. The same symptoms associated with methanol poisoning. The word hung in the air between them. William leaned forward, his attorney persona sliding into place. Mom, grief can make us look for explanations, for someone to blame. But sometimes, illness just happens. The medical records show elevated formic acid levels, Ellen said. That's a methanol metabolite. You requested his medical records? Daniel's voice rose slightly. Why would you put yourself through that? Because something doesn't add up, Ellen said. William reached across the table, patting her hand. You're exhausted, emotionally drained. Let us handle the paperwork, the details. You need to rest. What I need, Ellen said, withdrawing her hand, is the truth. The truth is that Dad died of organ failure, William said firmly. Searching for conspiracies won't bring him back. Daniel nodded eagerly. We're worried about you, Mom. This isn't healthy. Ellen recognized the technique, concern as control, gaslighting disguised as care. She'd seen it used on elderly parents by well-meaning children, never imagining it would be used on her. Perhaps you're right, she conceded, seeing no advantage in pressing further. I'm tired. Would you mind clearing the dishes? I think I'll lie down. The Riverside Cafe sat across from the park, its windows steamed with coffee-scented warmth. Ellen had chosen it for its public nature, safe, visible, but private enough for conversation. The man who approached her table was not what she expected. Michael Stone was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and the watchful eyes of someone accustomed to noticing details. No flashy private investigator aesthetic, just a weathered leather briefcase and sensible coat. Mrs. Carter, he said, extending his hand. Thank you for meeting me. Ellen gestured to the chair opposite. You said on the phone that my husband hired you? 3 weeks before his death. Michael ordered coffee when the server approached, waiting until she departed before continuing. Mr. Carter suspected someone was tampering with his medication or food. He hired me to investigate discreetly. My sons think I'm imagining things, Ellen said, studying his face for signs of deception. Your husband wasn't imagining things either. Michael placed a folder on the table, keeping his hand on it. He documented unusual symptoms, blurred vision, gastrointestinal distress, confusion, classic signs of methanol poisoning when administered gradually. Ellen's throat tightened. I found similar notes in his medical records. Mr. Carter was methodical, Michael said. He didn't want to alarm you until he had proof, but he was concerned enough to take precautions. What kind of precautions? Michael slid the folder toward her. He left instructions that if anything happened to him, I should contact you, show you what we'd found. Ellen opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were surveillance photos of William and Daniel entering George's home office when the house was supposedly empty. Notes about financial troubles, William's law firm failing, Daniel's investment losses, a copy of the insurance policy she'd discovered. I don't understand, Ellen whispered, though the terrible truth was becoming clearer. Why would they? Financial desperation, Michael said gently. Your husband began to suspect when he overheard a phone conversation between your sons. He didn't want to believe it either. Ellen closed the folder, unable to look at the evidence any longer. What am I supposed to do with this? Your husband left something else for you. Michael reached into his briefcase and withdrew a small leather-bound book. His private journal. He kept it hidden in a safe deposit box that only I had access to. Ellen took the journal, recognizing George's handwriting on the cover. Something solid to hold on to while her world crumbled. "I can help you gather more evidence," Michael said, "but you need to be careful. If they suspect you know." The unfinished sentence hung between them. Ellen tucked the journal into her purse, a strange calm settling over her. "They're planning something else, aren't they?" Michael nodded grimly. "I believe so. The insurance policy is substantial, but half of it is still in your name. They wouldn't stop with George." The cafe continued its cheerful bustle around them, oblivious to the horror unfolding at their table. Ellen straightened her shoulders, feeling a resolve she never knew she possessed. "Then we'd better make sure they don't succeed," she said. Michael Stone's office occupied the second floor of a nondescript building downtown. No flashy sign advertised his services, just Stone Investigations, printed in modest lettering on the frosted glass door. Inside, Ellen found a space that was functional rather than impressive. Filing cabinets, a decent computer setup, and a corkboard covered with notes and photographs that Michael quickly flipped to its blank side when she entered. "Security precaution," he explained, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I don't want clients seeing each other's information." Ellen appreciated his discretion. "Have you found anything new since yesterday?" Michael nodded, pulling a folder from his desk. "Your husband was methodical. He started documenting strange symptoms back in January. Headaches, visual disturbances, confusion. By March, he suspected someone was tampering with his morning coffee." "The coffee, he complained, tasted bitter," Ellen murmured. "I thought he was being particular." "He began preparing his own coffee after that, but the symptoms continued intermittently. That's when he contacted me." Michael spread several photographs on the desk. "These are from surveillance I installed at your husband's request." Ellen's breath caught. The images showed William in George's study, opening the medicine cabinet where George kept his prescription bottles. "What's the plan now?" Ellen asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "We need conclusive evidence." Michael outlined a strategy involving hidden cameras, preservation of potential evidence, and a toxicology analysis of samples George had secretly preserved. "The challenge is keeping you safe while we gather proof." "They're still playing the devoted sons," Ellen said, "coming by daily to check on me." "That's both a threat and an opportunity." Michael handed her a small device. "This looks like a normal key fob, but contains a recorder. Keep it with you when they visit." Ellen turned the device over in her hands. "I never imagined needing to record my own children." "I understand how difficult this is," Michael said, his professional demeanor softening slightly. "But from what I've gathered, they're already implementing their next plan." "To poison me," Ellen said flatly. Michael nodded grimly. "We need to move quickly but carefully. I've scheduled the lab analysis of George's samples for tomorrow. In the meantime, don't eat or drink anything they bring you." Ellen slipped the recorder into her purse, a strange calm settling over her. The initial shock had given way to something harder, determination. "I taught third grade for 30 years, she told Michael. "I can recognize when someone's lying, even if they're my own sons." The church's fellowship hall buzzed with Sunday afternoon activity. Ellen stood by the refreshment table, nursing a cup of tea she'd prepared herself, watching William and Daniel move through the crowd of her friends and neighbors. They'd insisted on accompanying her today, "just to make sure you're doing all right, Mom." Martha Jennings, her friend of 20 years, approached with concern etched on her face. "Ellen, dear, how are you holding up? William mentioned you've been having a difficult time." Ellen maintained her pleasant expression. Did he? I'm managing as well as can be expected. He said, you've been, Martha lowered her voice, imagining conspiracies about George's death. A chill ran through Ellen. Is that what he told you? He's worried, dear. We all are. Grief can do strange things to the mind. Across the room, Daniel conversed with Pastor Roberts, their expressions serious. The pastor glanced in Ellen's direction, his brow furrowed with concern. William mentioned you've been requesting medical records, questioning doctors, Martha continued. He thinks you might need to talk to someone professional. I appreciate everyone's concern, Ellen replied carefully, but I'm simply trying to understand what happened to George. Pastor Roberts approached, placing a gentle hand on Ellen's shoulder. Ellen, I want you to know we're all here for you. Grief counseling can be very helpful in these situations. Thank you, Pastor. Ellen smiled, though her heart raced. I'll certainly consider it. She excused herself to the ladies' room, needing a moment alone. In the safety of the locked stall, Ellen leaned against the wall, processing what was happening. They were isolating her, undermining her credibility before she could reveal what she knew. If she spoke up now about her suspicions, it would only confirm the narrative they were creating. When she emerged, William was waiting in the hallway. Everything okay, Mom? You seem upset. Ellen forced a smile, just a bit overwhelmed by all the attention. Everyone's concerned. William's voice oozed sincerity. Daniel and I have been talking. We think it might be best if one of us stayed with you for a while. You shouldn't be alone right now. The implication was clear. They wanted to monitor her, control her movements. That's thoughtful, Ellen replied, but I need my space to grieve. William's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. We insist, Mom. Daniel's already packing a bag. He'll stay in the guest room starting tonight. Ellen felt the trap closing around her. Her sons had become strangers wearing familiar faces, their concern a mask for something much darker. How considerate of you both, she managed to say, feeling the weight of the recorder in her pocket. I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about. The laboratory report lay on the table of the motel room Michael had secured for their meeting. Ellen had told Daniel she was attending a grief support group, a lie that fit neatly into his narrative of her fragility. The results are conclusive, Michael said, his finger tracing the highlighted sections. Methanol was present in both George's coffee thermos and his antacid medication. The concentrations increased over the samples he preserved from different dates. Ellen stared at the report, the scientific language confirming what she'd feared. They poisoned him gradually. Yes, small doses over time, causing symptoms that mimicked natural illness until the final lethal dose. Michael's voice remained professional, but his eyes reflected genuine compassion. I'm sorry, Ellen. She touched the paper, as if physical contact might help her absorb the terrible reality. Her sons, whom she'd carried, nursed, taught to read, attended graduations and weddings, had methodically murdered their father and were now targeting her. There's more, Michael said, opening another folder. Yes, I've been tracking their financial situations. William's law firm is facing a malpractice suit that could bankrupt him. Daniel lost heavily in some high-risk investments. They're both deeply in debt. And George's insurance policy would solve those problems, Ellen finished, along with your policy and the house equity. Michael hesitated. Ellen, I need to tell you something disturbing. The methanol pattern matches what they used on George. It's already started. Ellen looked up sharply. What do you mean? The water bottle in your refrigerator. The one Daniel brought yesterday claiming it was special mineral water to help you sleep. Tested positive for methanol. A wave of nausea swept through her, not from poison, but from the confirmation that her own children were actively trying to murder her. The abstract had become horrifyingly concrete. "We have enough evidence for the police now," Michael said. "We should contact them immediately." Ellen nodded numbly, then paused as her phone chimed with a text message from William. "Stopping by with dinner for you and Daniel around 7. Important family discussion." "They're coming tonight," she said, showing Michael the message. "Both of them." Michael considered this. This could be our opportunity to record them together, possibly discussing their plans. Ellen stared at the message, a strange calm settling over her. The initial shock had transformed into something steely and resolute. These weren't her sons anymore. Not really. The boys she'd raised had been replaced by something monstrous wearing their faces. As she gathered her purse to leave, she heard voices through the thin motel wall. William and Daniel, their tones urgent and conspiratorial. "Needs to happen faster. She's asking too many questions." William's voice. "The water bottle was just the first dose." Daniel responded. "By next week, she'll start showing symptoms. Everyone already thinks she's unstable. They'll assume it's stress-related. Just make sure you're documenting her confusion for the doctors. We need to establish that pattern before—" Ellen froze, meeting Michael's alarmed gaze. They hadn't just happened to be in the adjacent room. They had followed her. They knew. "I need you to be prepared for what you're about to hear." Michael's voice was gentle but firm as he set up the digital recorder on the table of his office. Dawn light filtered through the blinds, casting striped shadows across their faces. Ellen had barely slept after their narrow escape from the motel last night. Michael had hustled her out through a service exit while her sons were still talking, arranging for her to stay at a colleague's vacant apartment. "I'm ready," Ellen said, though nothing could truly prepare her. Michael pressed play. William's voice filled the room, unnervingly casual. "The methanol is working, but too slowly. We need to increase the dosage." "We can't be obvious about it," Daniel responded. "The doctors might get suspicious if it happens too fast. Dad's already complaining about the coffee tasting bitter. We need to find another delivery method. His antacids, he takes them every night like clockwork." There was a pause, then William's voice again. "How much longer do you think?" "At this rate, 2, maybe 3 weeks before organ failure." Ellen's hands gripped the armrests of her chair. These clinical voices, discussing her husband's murder as if planning a business strategy, belonged to the boys she had raised. The same boys who had once made Father's Day cards with crayon-scribbled hearts, who had cried when their goldfish died, who had hugged George so tightly at their college graduations. "When did you record this?" she asked, her voice hollow. 3 weeks before your husband's death." He suspected something was wrong and placed recording devices in several locations. Michael played another clip. This time, it was Daniel, his voice tight with frustration. "He's getting suspicious. I caught him looking at the antacid bottle yesterday." "Stay calm," William replied. "We're too close to back out now. The insurance policy is worth millions, split between us." Ellen closed her eyes, memories flooding unbidden. Daniel taking his first steps, arms outstretched toward her. William reading law books aloud to his father, seeking approval. When had those boys become these men? "There's more," Michael said quietly, "but I think this is enough for now." Ellen shook her head. "No, I need to hear it all." By the time the recordings ended, Ellen felt as though she'd aged decades in minutes. The evidence was irrefutable. The sons she had raised had loved unconditionally, had planned and executed their father's murder with cold precision, and now they were planning hers. Her maternal identity, the core of how she had defined herself for over 40 years, lay in shattered pieces at her feet. They're discussing specific timelines for your poisoning. Michael rewound the surveillance footage, his movements precise and controlled. They had relocated to his associate's apartment, a sparse, utilitarian space with minimal furnishings. The laptop screen displayed grainy footage from a camera Michael had hidden in Ellen's kitchen 2 days prior. On screen, William and Daniel stood at Ellen's kitchen island, speaking in low voices while preparing what appeared to be tea. "The mineral water was too obvious," William was saying. "She's suspicious. She won't question tea from her own kitchen." Daniel held up a small vial, 2 drops in each cup, starting today. "By next weekend, she'll have symptoms we can document." Ellen watched with a strange detachment as Daniel carefully added drops to a teapot, the blue ceramic one George had given her for their 40th anniversary. "And you're sure this dosage is right?" William asked. "We need her impaired enough that everyone believes it's dementia, but not enough to trigger medical suspicion. Trust me, I researched this extensively." Daniel's voice contained a chilling pride. "We'll document her confused episodes, get statements from church friends about her erratic behavior, build a case for cognitive decline. Then, when she has a tragic accident, no one will question it." Michael stopped the footage, watching Ellen carefully. "Are you all right?" She wasn't. The abstract knowledge of their betrayal was one thing. Watching them actually poison her tea, in her own kitchen, using the pot George had given her, was another level of horror entirely. "They've been planning this for months," she said finally. "George's murder, then mine, their own parents. Financial desperation makes people do unthinkable things," Michael replied, though his voice suggested even he found this level of betrayal hard to comprehend. Ellen stood abruptly, pacing the small living room. "I should have seen it. There were signs." "Don't blame yourself," Michael interrupted. "They deliberately concealed their actions. They're educated, intelligent men who planned this meticulously." Ellen stopped at the window, staring out at the city below. The mundane normality of life continuing outside felt surreal against the horror unfolding in her own. "They think I'm at home now, drinking poisoned tea," she said. "When I don't show symptoms, they'll realize something's wrong." "We need to move quickly," Michael agreed. "With this evidence, we can go to the police." "My sons," Ellen's voice broke on the word. "My own sons want me dead." The enormity of this truth hit her fully for the first time, not just as evidence on recordings or surveillance footage, but as the devastating reality that would define the rest of her life. The family she thought she had was gone, had never really existed. "I need to go home," she said suddenly. Michael looked alarmed. "Ellen, that's not safe." "Not to stay," she clarified. "There's something I need to get, something of George's." Ellen stood alone in George's study, the house eerily silent around her. Michael waited in the car outside, ready to intervene if her sons returned unexpectedly. The familiar room felt like a museum exhibit of a life that no longer existed. George's reading glasses still on the desk, his cardigan draped over the chair, his collection of first edition mysteries lining the shelves. The weight of everything, the recordings, the surveillance footage, the irrefutable evidence that her sons had murdered their father and planned to murder her, suddenly became too much to bear. Ellen's knees buckled, and she sank to the floor beside George's desk. For the first time since receiving that text message at the funeral, she allowed herself to truly feel the magnitude of her loss. Not just George, but the sons she thought she had, the family that had defined her life for over 40 years, the identity she had carried as a mother, all of it poisoned beyond redemption. A sob tore from her throat, raw, primal, the sound of something fundamental breaking. Her body curled forward, arms wrapped around herself, as if trying to hold together what was shattering inside. "How could they?" she whispered to the empty room. "How could they do this, George?" Minutes passed as waves of grief crashed over her, for George's suffering, for her lost children, for the family that had never been what she believed. Time blurred until eventually the storm began to subside, leaving her hollow and spent on the study floor. As her breathing steadied, Ellen's gaze fell on the bottom drawer of George's desk, the one he always kept locked, where he stored important papers. Sitting up, she remembered the small key she'd found in his wallet after the funeral. She'd kept it with her, though she hadn't yet had the heart to open the drawer. Now, with shaking hands, she retrieved the key from her purse and fit it into the lock. Inside, she found several folders of financial documents, their mortgage papers, and at the very back, a sealed envelope with her name written in George's familiar handwriting. Ellen stared at it, her heart suddenly pounding. This wasn't just another document. This was a message, something George had prepared but never given her. She carefully broke the seal and withdrew several pages of George's distinctive handwriting. The date at the top was just 3 days before his death. "My dearest Ellen," it began. She pressed the letter to her chest, not yet reading further, feeling a connection to George that transcended death. In this moment of utter desolation, her husband had reached across time to find her. Ellen rose from the floor on unsteady legs, tucking the letter securely into her purse. Whatever George had written, whatever guidance or comfort or final thoughts he had left for her, deserved to be read somewhere safe, somewhere their sons couldn't intrude. As she quietly left the study, a strange sense of purpose began to replace the hollow devastation. George had anticipated this moment. He had prepared for it. And now, even from beyond the grave, he was still trying to protect her. For the first time since discovering the terrible truth, Ellen felt a tiny spark of something other than despair, a fragile ember of resolve, waiting to be kindled into action. Dawn light filtered through the curtains of Michael's spare bedroom, where Ellen had spent a restless night. She sat cross-legged on the bed, George's letter cradled in her hands like something fragile and precious. For several minutes, she simply traced her fingers over his handwriting, the familiar slant of his letters, the way he pressed too hard with his pen, creating slight indentations on the paper. Finally, she began to read. "My dearest Ellen, if you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct, and I am no longer with you. I've struggled with whether to burden you with what I've discovered, but I've come to realize that your safety depends on knowing the truth. For months, I've noticed disturbing patterns. My medications tampered with, my coffee tasting strange, my symptoms worsening after meals prepared by William or Daniel. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. What father suspects his sons of such a thing? But I've gathered evidence, Ellen. The investigator, Michael Stone, has been helping me. The bank statements show the extent of William and Daniel's financial troubles. They're desperate men, and the insurance policy I was pressured to sign makes me worth more to them dead than alive." Ellen paused, drawing a shaky breath before continuing. "I've arranged for Stone to contact you if anything happens to me. Trust him. He has integrity. a quality our sons seem to have lost. This isn't your fault, Ellen. We raised them with love and values. Whatever corrupted them happened beyond our influence, choices they made as adults that we couldn't control. If I'm gone, they'll target you next. The second insurance policy they don't know about names you as sole beneficiary. You must protect yourself. I'm sorry to leave you with this burden, but I know your strength. It has always been your quiet wisdom that held our family together, though I never said it enough. With all my love across whatever divide separates us, George. Ellen pressed the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Not tears of devastation now, but of connection. Even in death, George had found a way to protect her, to guide her. The decades they had spent building a life together hadn't been erased by their son's betrayal. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ellen felt something beyond shock and grief, a sense of purpose taking root. George had trusted her strength. Now she would honor that trust by ensuring justice was served. George was more prepared than I realized, Ellen said, sliding the letter across Michael's desk. Michael's office felt different in daylight, less a fortress and more a workshop. Maps and timelines covered the corkboard now, and several audio devices were being prepped on a side table. He read the letter carefully, nodding at certain points. This confirms what we've gathered. Your husband was methodical in his documentation. He mentioned a second insurance policy, Ellen said, one that names only me as beneficiary. Yes, I have those details. Michael opened a folder. It's substantial, a policy he took out 6 months ago when he first became suspicious. The boys don't know about it. Ellen leaned forward. So what's our next step? We have the recordings, the toxicology reports, the surveillance footage. Enough for the police, Michael confirmed. But timing is critical. Your sons believe you're at home, gradually consuming poison tea. When they realize you've disappeared, they'll panic, Ellen finished, possibly destroy evidence. Exactly. Michael laid out several photographs. We need to move directly to confrontation, but with safeguards in place. Over the next hour, they developed a strategy. Police would be positioned nearby, but out of sight. Surveillance equipment would record every word. Ellen would confront her sons with what she knew, while authorities listened. It's risky, Michael cautioned. They're desperate men with nothing to lose. I need to look them in the eyes, Ellen said firmly. I need them to know, that their father knew. Before they're arrested, I want that moment of truth between us. Michael studied her face. This isn't about revenge, is it? No. Ellen's voice was steady. It's about justice. For George. And for the family we thought we had. Your husband was right about you, Michael said. A rare personal comment from the professional investigator. You do have remarkable strength. Ellen looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once bandaged her son's scraped knees, that had applauded at their graduations, that had held George's as he died. Hands that now held evidence of murder. Tomorrow evening, she said decisively, I'll call them for a family dinner. Tell them I have important decisions to make about the estate. Michael nodded, reaching for his phone. I'll coordinate with the police detective. We'll need several hours to set up the equipment. As they finalized the details, Ellen felt a strange calm settling over her. The path ahead was clear now, painful, but necessary. George had given her his final gift, the truth that would save her life and bring justice for his death. Ellen stood in her bedroom, the house silent around her. Michael and the police technicians had left after installing hidden cameras and microphones throughout the downstairs. In a few hours, her sons would arrive for what they believed was a simple family dinner to discuss George's estate. She moved to her closet, selecting a blue dress George had always admired. On her dresser sat the photographs she was examining. Not evidence files now, but family pictures spanning decades. William's high school graduation, Daniel's wedding day, a family vacation to the coast when the boys were teenagers. George standing proudly between his sons at William's law school graduation. The smiling faces seemed to belong to strangers now. Had they been wearing masks even then, or had something fundamental changed inside them over the years? Ellen would never know. She picked up a photo of George, one taken on their 40th anniversary. His eyes crinkled with genuine happiness, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered to the image. "But also for myself." The woman who had discovered that text message at George's funeral no longer existed. In her place stood someone tempered by unimaginable betrayal, someone who had looked into the darkest corners of human capacity and emerged not broken, but transformed. Ellen moved to the window, watching the late afternoon light gild the neighborhood she and George had called home for 30 years. The familiar view felt different now, the safety of this space permanently altered. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same. Yet, alongside the grief, ran a current of something unexpected, a sense of her own capacity. She had survived the death of her husband and the destruction of her family. She had faced truths that might have shattered someone else entirely. The Ellen who had always defined herself primarily as wife and mother was gone. In her place stood a woman with a clearer understanding of justice, of boundaries, of her own resilience. She closed the photo album and placed it in the drawer. The past belonged there now. Tonight was about truth, about consequences, about facing reality without flinching. Ellen checked her watch. 2 hours until her sons would arrive, expecting to find a vulnerable, increasingly confused mother ripe for exploitation. Instead, they would face a woman who had discovered her own strength in the crucible of their betrayal. She reached for her phone and typed a message to Michael. "I'm ready." The response came immediately. "We're in position. Remember the signal if you feel unsafe." Ellen slipped the phone into her pocket and headed downstairs to prepare. Not a family dinner now, but the scene of a necessary confrontation. As she descended the stairs, she felt George's presence beside her, not as a ghost, but as the love that had sustained them through 43 years of marriage. That love would carry her through tonight's ordeal and whatever lay beyond. William's home office stood silent and dark as Ellen slipped inside, the beam from her small flashlight sweeping methodically across the room. Michael waited in the car outside, monitoring the security system he'd temporarily disabled. This wasn't how Ellen had imagined spending her Saturday night at 66, breaking into her own son's house to gather evidence of his murderous conspiracy. "Check the desk first," Michael's voice instructed through her earpiece. "Bottom right drawer had financial documents when we surveilled last week." Ellen moved with surprising steadiness toward the large mahogany desk. Similar to George's, she noted with bitter irony. The drawer slid open smoothly, revealing meticulously organized folders. Her librarian's instinct for organization served her well as she quickly photographed bank statements showing massive withdrawals, credit card statements reflecting desperate spending patterns, and a notepad with calculations of George's insurance payout divided in two. "Found something," she whispered, focusing on a handwritten timeline. "It's a schedule. Phase 1 was George. Phase 2 is me. There are specific dates and notes about symptom progression." "Perfect," Michael replied. "That confirms premeditation. Get clear images." As Ellen documented the evidence, a car door slammed outside. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Someone's here," Michael's urgent voice warned. "Daniel's car just pulled up. Get out now. Use the back door as planned." Ellen quickly returned the documents to their original positions and closed the drawer. As she moved toward the exit, her elbow caught a framed photograph, sending it crashing to the floor. She froze, listening for any reaction from the front of the house. The sound of keys in the front door galvanized her into action. Ellen slipped through the office's rear exit into the hallway, then through the kitchen toward the back door as Daniel's voice called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" The back door opened silently. Michael had oiled the hinges during his reconnaissance, and Ellen stepped into the cool night air, moving swiftly along the planned escape route through the neighbor's yard to where Michael waited with the car running. "Did you get what we needed?" he asked as she slid into the passenger seat. Ellen nodded, her hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. "Everything, including a schedule for my murder." As they drove away, she felt a complex mixture of triumph and sorrow. The evidence would help bring her sons to justice, but each new discovery hammered another nail into the coffin of the family she had once believed in. "Mom, you're looking well," William said 3 days later, studying Ellen across her dining room table. "The color's back in your cheeks." Ellen smiled, passing him the basket of rolls she'd baked that morning. "I've been sleeping better lately." Daniel's gaze sharpened. "No more headaches or vision issues. You mentioned blurry vision when I called last week." "Must have been temporary," Ellen replied, noting the quick glance exchanged between her sons. They were expecting symptoms that would mirror George's decline from methanol poisoning. William leaned forward, his attorney's smile in place. "We've been concerned. You seemed confused at church on Sunday. Pastor Roberts mentioned you were asking about George's funeral, as if you'd forgotten details." Ellen's pulse quickened. She hadn't attended church on Sunday. She'd been with Michael documenting evidence. They were creating a false narrative of her deterioration. "My memory is just fine," she said, carefully measuring her tone. "In fact, I've been going through George's papers, found some interesting financial documents." Daniel's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "What kind of documents?" "Insurance policies, mostly. Did you know your father took out a second policy shortly before he died?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. William's smile remained fixed, but his eyes had hardened. "I'm sure Dad was just being thorough," he said smoothly. "What else have you been up to? Martha mentioned she hasn't seen you at your usual bridge game." Ellen cut her chicken methodically. "I've been spending time with a new friend, Michael. He's been very helpful since your father passed." "Michael?" Daniel's voice carried a sharp edge. "You've never mentioned him before." "Haven't I? He's become quite important to me recently." William placed his napkin beside his plate with deliberate care. "Perhaps we should meet this Michael. Make sure he has your best interests at heart. You know how some people target vulnerable widows." The irony was almost unbearable. "Speaking of vulnerability," Ellen said, her voice steady, "I've been thinking about moving George's collection of rare books to a safety deposit box, the one with his handwritten notes inside." No such collection existed, but the sudden tension in William's posture told Ellen everything. He believed she might have found George's documentation. "I should go," Daniel said abruptly. "Early meeting tomorrow." As Ellen walked them to the door, William placed a too-firm hand on her shoulder. "We'll check in on you tomorrow, Mom. I think we should discuss getting you some help around the house. You shouldn't be alone so much." The implied threat hung in the air between them as they departed. Ellen locked the door, then texted Michael. "They know something's wrong. We need to move quickly." "They're inside now," Michael confirmed, watching the surveillance feed from their position in the van parked across from William's law office. Fourth floor, corner office. It was nearly midnight. The after-hours meeting between her sons had been hastily arranged following their dinner with Ellen, exactly as she and Michael had anticipated. "Audio's live," the police technician beside them announced, adjusting his headphones. "We're recording." Ellen leaned forward, listening as her sons' voices filled the van. "She knows something," William was saying. "Or suspects, at least, mentioning that second insurance policy." "She can't have proof," Daniel interrupted. "We were careful." "She mentioned some guy named Michael. What if he's been helping her investigate? What if Dad left something behind?" "Then we accelerate the timeline," Daniel said coldly. "The methanol clearly isn't working. She should be showing symptoms by now." William's voice lowered. "An accident would be cleaner. The stairs in her house are steep. A fall at her age could easily be fatal." "This weekend," Daniel agreed. "We'll check on her tomorrow, see what else she knows. Then Saturday night, after I take her to dinner, you'll be the concerned son who finds her." Ellen's hands gripped the edge of the monitoring console, her knuckles white. The clinical discussion of her murder, just days away, was more chilling than any horror movie. The police detective nodded grimly. "We've got it. Clear conspiracy to commit murder." "We need the documentation," Michael insisted. "The files proving they poisoned George are in William's private safe. While they're occupied, I'll retrieve them." Ellen watched on the monitor as Michael slipped into the building, using the security access they'd obtained through their investigation. Long minutes passed as he navigated to William's office, then the adjacent file room. The radio crackled. "I've found it." "The safe is behind the Monet print, just as our source indicated." More tense minutes as Michael worked the combination they'd discovered. Then, "I've got the files, medical reports, methanol purchase receipts, timing notes, all with their handwriting. Heading out now." Ellen exhaled shakily. With this evidence, combined with the recorded conspiracy, they had everything needed for arrest warrants. The case against her sons was now irrefutable. As she watched Michael exit the building, a movement on another monitor caught her attention. William and Daniel were gathering their things, preparing to leave the meeting room. "They're coming down," the technician warned. The elevator indicator showed William and Daniel descending rapidly. Michael, heading for the side exit, was still inside. Ellen's heart raced as she watched the security feeds. If they encountered Michael with the evidence. The elevator reached the ground floor. William and Daniel stepped out just as Michael turned a corner toward the exit. "Stop," William's voice came through the audio. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" Ellen watched in horror as her sons confronted Michael, Daniel's eyes narrowing with sudden recognition as he spotted the files tucked under Michael's arm. "You're him," Daniel said. "Michael, Mom's new friend." William stepped closer, his voice dangerous. "And those files belong to me." The police officers were already moving, but Ellen knew they wouldn't reach them in time to prevent what might happen next. On the monitor, Michael backed toward the exit, her sons advancing like predators sensing wounded prey. The final evidence was in hand, but at what cost? Police officers swarmed into the law office lobby just as William took a threatening step toward Michael. The sudden commotion, flashing badges, authoritative commands, froze the tableau like a paused film. "William and Daniel Carter, step away from Mr. "It's Stone immediately," Detective Reynolds ordered, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered weapon. Ellen entered behind the officers, her back straight, her eyes steady as they met her sons. The confusion on their faces quickly morphed to shock at her appearance. "Mom?" "What is this?" William demanded, recovering first. His attorney's instincts kicked in as he straightened his tie. "There's been some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding," Ellen interrupted. Her voice, though quiet, carried an authority neither son had heard before. "The police have recordings of your conversation tonight, planning my accident for Saturday." Daniel's face drained of color. "You can't possibly—" "We have everything," Michael said, carefully handing the evidence files to Detective Reynolds. "Financial records, methanol purchase receipts, timeline notes for George's poisoning, recordings of your planning sessions, both for your father's murder and your mother's." The lobby filled with the procedural sounds of arrest. Miranda rights recited, handcuffs clicking closed. William stood rigid, his expression calculating even now, while Daniel seemed to physically deflate. "You don't understand," William attempted. "Dad's business was failing. We were all going to lose everything." "So you murdered him?" Ellen's question cut through his justifications. "Your own father? And then planned to murder me?" "It wasn't like that," Daniel protested weakly. "We were desperate. I was desperate when you were children, and I worked 2 jobs to put food on the table," Ellen replied. "I was desperate when your father had his heart attack 10 years ago, and we weren't sure he'd survive. We didn't poison anyone." As the officers prepared to lead them away, Ellen stepped forward. Around her neck hung the locket George had given her on their 25th anniversary, containing their wedding photo. "I want you to understand something," she said, her voice wavering only slightly. "This isn't revenge. This is justice. For George, and for the family we thought we had." Something unexpected flickered across William's face. A crack in the polished facade, a glimpse of genuine emotion. Shame, perhaps. Regret. For a moment, Ellen saw a shadow of the boy who had once idolized his father. But Daniel's face hardened into bitterness. "You've destroyed everything," he spat. "No," Ellen replied with quiet dignity. "You did that yourselves. I'm just ensuring you face the consequences." As they were led away, Ellen stood in the echoing lobby, the weight of what had just happened settling over her like a heavy cloak. Not just the arrest of her sons, but her own transformation from the woman she had been to the woman she had become. The visitors' room at the county detention center smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. Ellen sat stiffly on the uncomfortable plastic chair, facing the glass partition where William would soon appear. Michael waited outside, close enough for support, but giving her the privacy this moment required. When William entered, Ellen was struck by how diminished he seemed without his tailored suit and confident bearing. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his frame, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. He hesitated before sitting, as if unsure of his welcome. When he finally picked up the phone, his voice was rough. "I didn't think you'd come." "I needed to understand," Ellen replied. The glass between them felt both insufficient and necessary, a barrier between mother and son, victim and perpetrator. William stared at his hands. "Daniel refuses to see you." "I know." "I tried yesterday." Silence stretched between them, decades of shared history suddenly rendered alien by recent events. "Why, William?" The question that had haunted Ellen's sleepless nights finally emerged. "We raised you with everything we could give." He flinched, unable to meet her eyes. "It started small, bad investments, loans I couldn't repay, then the malpractice suit." He swallowed hard. "I was going to lose everything. My practice, my house. Julie was threatening divorce." "So you decided to poison your father?" Ellen's voice remained steady, though her hand gripped the phone tightly. "It was Daniel's idea at first," William whispered. "Just talking, fantasizing. Then suddenly we were planning it. Each step made the next one easier." He finally looked up. "I know it doesn't matter, but I'm sorry, Mom. Not just for getting caught. For everything." Ellen studied her son's face, searching for the boy she had raised, the man she thought she knew. The genuine remorse she saw surprised her, not because she'd thought William incapable of it, but because she hadn't expected to recognize anything familiar in him again. "Daniel says it was your idea," she said quietly. William closed his eyes briefly. "We're both responsible. I can't blame him any more than myself." The attorney waiting behind William signaled that time was running short. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," Ellen said, the words painful but necessary. "But I do believe your remorse is real." "What happens now?" William asked, a child's question from a middle-aged man facing life imprisonment. "Justice happens," Ellen answered. "For your father, for me, for you both." As she rose to leave, William pressed his palm against the glass, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood goodbye ritual that Ellen's heart constricted painfully. After a moment's hesitation, she briefly placed her hand against his, separated by the barrier that would now define their relationship. 6 months later, Ellen sat in the courtroom as the judge delivered the sentences. William, who had cooperated fully and expressed remorse, received 25 years. Daniel, who had maintained his innocence despite overwhelming evidence, received life without parole. The formality of the proceedings, the gaveling of completion, the dry legal language seemed inadequate to mark the conclusion of such a personal tragedy. As Ellen gathered her purse to leave, a woman approximately her age approached hesitantly. "Mrs. Carter, I'm Margaret Thornton. I followed your case closely." Ellen nodded politely, eager to escape the courthouse and its oppressive atmosphere. "My husband died last year," Margaret continued. "I've recently discovered evidence that my son may have hastened his passing for insurance money." Ellen's attention sharpened. "Have you gone to the police?" "I'm afraid," Margaret admitted. "He's all the family I have left." The pain in the woman's eyes was achingly familiar. The same devastation Ellen had experienced, the same impossible choice. "Would you have time for coffee?" Ellen asked impulsively. "I understand what you're going through better than most." At a quiet cafe across from the courthouse, they were joined by 2 other women, both elderly, both with similar stories of suspected exploitation or harm by family members. "We followed your courage in the news," explained Harriet, a retired nurse whose nephew had drained her savings. "You stood up not just for yourself, but for your husband, too." "Most elderly victims never get justice," added Ruth, who had narrowly escaped her grandson's attempt to have her declared incompetent. "Family courts favor the younger generation. Adult protective services is overwhelmed. We're seen as disposable." As Ellen listened to their stories, something stirred within her, a sense of purpose beyond her personal tragedy. These women needed what she had found with Michael's help: advocacy, information, support. "George left me well provided for," Ellen said thoughtfully. "The insurance policy our sons didn't know about. I've been wondering what to do with it." "What are you thinking?" Margaret asked. "A foundation," Ellen replied, the idea taking shape as she spoke, providing resources for elderly victims of family exploitation and abuse, legal support, investigation services, advocacy. The women exchanged glances, hope kindling in eyes that had seen too much betrayal. George would have approved, Ellen continued, feeling her husband's presence in this moment of creation from destruction. Something good should come from our tragedy. As they discussed possibilities, Ellen felt a weight lifting, not the grief or loss, which would always remain part of her, but the sense of purposelessness that had threatened to consume her after the trial. The Carter Foundation, Margaret suggested, for elder justice. Ellen nodded, thinking of George's final gift to her, not just the evidence that had saved her life, but the opportunity to transform her pain into purpose. For those who can't speak for themselves, she agreed, and for those who need someone to believe them when they do. The courthouse loomed outside the window, a symbol of justice served. But here, in this cafe, something equally important was beginning. Healing that reached beyond one family's tragedy to touch countless others. The auditorium of the Riverside Community Center hummed with conversation as Ellen Carter stood near the podium, watching attendees find their seats. The Carter Foundation for Elder Justice was celebrating its first anniversary with a modest ceremony honoring both volunteers and those they had helped. A banner stretched across the stage bearing the foundation's logo, a stylized bridge connecting two shores, and its motto, Truth, Justice, Dignity. In the lobby, a memorial wall displayed photos of elderly victims whose cases had inspired the foundation's work. George's photo held the central position, his kind eyes seeming to watch over the proceedings. "We're ready whenever you are, Mrs. Carter," said Michael Stone, now the Foundation's head of investigations. Their professional relationship had evolved into a friendship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Ellen nodded, smoothing her blue dress, the same one she had worn during the confrontation with her sons a year earlier. The symbolism was intentional, full circle, from devastation to renewal. As she addressed the gathering, Ellen marveled at how much had changed. The Foundation had already helped 27 elderly victims of family exploitation, providing legal assistance, investigation services, and emotional support. 3 other communities had requested guidance on establishing similar programs. "Pain can destroy us or transform us," Ellen told the audience. "The choice isn't always easy, but it's always ours to make." She didn't mention her sons by name. William, showing genuine remorse, had provided testimony that helped other victims. Daniel remained unrepentant. Ellen had made her peace with both realities. What sustained her wasn't the justice achieved, though that mattered deeply, but the purpose discovered amid devastation. Every elderly person who found protection through the Foundation honored George's memory more profoundly than grief alone ever could. "Trust requires vigilance," Ellen concluded, her voice steady and clear. "But love demands accountability." In holding these truths together, we find our way forward, not despite our wounds, but because of what they teach us.